My brother's best friend's wife told the head table I was a nurse who couldn't get into a real specialty. Then the flower girl went into anaphylaxis and no one else moved. That sentence is the whole story. But I need you to understand what came before it, because Cecily Sinclair didn't just decide to humiliate me at a rehearsal dinner. She'd been building toward it for years, brick by brick, lie by lie, until the version of me she'd constructed for the family barely resembled a person at all. Just a disappointment with a stethoscope. My name is Blair Sinclair. I'm 40 years old. I'm a trauma surgeon at a Level 1 center, and before that, I spent 10 years in the United States Army, including 18 months with a forward surgical team in Wardak Province, Afghanistan. I've held a man's liver together with my fingers while mortar rounds hit close enough to knock dust from the tent ceiling. I've operated by headlamp when the generator failed. I've made decisions in seconds that most people never have to make at all. And to Cecily, my brother's best friend's wife, who'd made herself the family's center of gravity, I was the family embarrassment. I need to go back, not to the rehearsal dinner, further, to a tent in Wardak during a sandstorm, because that's where this body I'm living in got remade, and if you don't understand that, the rest won't land the way it should. Forward Surgical Team 7. August. The kind of heat that makes your instruments warm to the touch before you even pick them up. We were running 2 tables that night because a convoy hit an IED and the casualties came in stacked. My surgical tech, Corporal Ethan Briggs, was assisting me on a young specialist with a ruptured spleen when the call came. Second casualty coding on the other table. Ethan looked at me. I told him to go. That left me alone with an open abdomen, a splenectomy half finished, and a sandstorm chewing through the tent seams hard enough to grit your teeth. I needed a retractor held in place. There was no one to hold it, so I clamped it between my teeth and kept cutting. 40 minutes. My jaw locked around surgical steel for 40 minutes while I worked with both hands inside a 19-year-old kid who didn't know my name and wouldn't remember my face. The sustained pressure cracked my lower left molar clean through. Damaged the temporomandibular joint on the left side. The specialist lived. Walked out of Landstuhl 3 weeks later. My jaw clicks now. Every time I chew. Every time I yawn. An audible pop that my surgical residents have learned to listen for, because when I touch the hinge point below my ear, press 2 fingers just under the joint, it means I'm concentrating. It means the problem in front of me has my full attention, and they should stop talking. I don't tell people that story. I don't explain the click. It's mine. If you've ever carried something in your body that nobody around you understands, something that aches when the weather changes or clicks when you eat, and the people closest to you never once asked where it came from, I think you'll understand why I'm telling you this now. You're going to want to hear how this ends. My brother David was an Army medic. Same province, different year. He was killed 2 years before my deployment. An ambush during a routine patrol that wasn't routine at all. He was 29. He left behind a son, a wife who would become Cecily's project, and a pair of field surgical scissors. The scissors came to me in a box with his personal effects, still sharp, still stained with something I chose not to test. Tied to the handle was a note in David's handwriting, the kind of scrawl that medics develop because there's never enough time. Finish what I started. I joined the Army 4 months later. Those scissors have been in my bag every day since. Not as a relic, as a compass. When the residency got brutal, and trauma surgery residency is a specific kind of brutal, the kind where you're on your feet for 36 hours, and the attending asks you a question about portal vein anatomy, and if you get it wrong, someone could die. I'd open my bag and see the edge of the handle. That was enough. Cecily married Robert, David's best friend from high school, 3 years after David's death. Robert is a good man, quiet, the kind of man who grieves by going still. He adopted David's son Leo, raised him as his own, and never once tried to replace David's memory. I respected that. I loved Robert for it. Cecily was different. Cecily is a dermatologist, board certified, successful practice. I don't diminish that. Dermatology is competitive and legitimate. But Cecily did something I've seen before in people who are accomplished in one specific lane. She made that lane the only lane that counted. And because her lane was medicine, she felt qualified to rank mine. It started small. A comment at Thanksgiving when Leo was 8. Blair works in the ER, basically. I was in my 3rd year of trauma surgery residency. I let it go. You let things go at family dinners. That's what the table requires. Then it escalated. She's basically a nurse with extra steps. That was Christmas 3 years later. I'd just completed my fellowship. Robert looked at his plate. Leo was doing homework in the next room. A real specialty requires finesse. Trauma is just, adrenaline. That was a 4th of July barbecue. I'd performed a damage control thoracotomy that morning, opened a man's chest in the trauma bay, clamped the aorta, and kept his heart going until we could get to the OR. I still had the soreness in my forearms from the rib spreader. I ate a hot dog and said nothing. The comments weren't the worst of it. The worst came in 3 moves, and Cecily executed them with the precision of someone who'd thought about each one. Move 1. She contacted the family's estate attorney, the one handling David's death gratuity, the military's payment to the family of a fallen service member, and pressured him to reduce my share. Her argument was that I'd distance myself from the family by deploying and then relocating for residency, that the gratuity should go primarily to Leo's trust, administered by her and Robert. The implication was clear. I didn't deserve a share of my own brother's death because I'd had the audacity to follow his last wish. Move 2. She told Leo, David's son, my nephew, a kid I'd taught to ride a bike on leave, and called every Sunday from whatever base or hospital I was stationed at. She told him that his mother chose a career over your father's memory. Leo was 14 when she said it, old enough to believe it. Old enough to stop answering my Sunday calls. That one I didn't find out about until later. I just knew the calls stopped. I left voicemails for 3 months. Cheerful, light. Hey, it's Aunt Blair. Just checking in. Call me when you get a chance. The kind of messages you leave when you're pretending you don't notice the silence. Leo never called back. I told myself it was adolescence. I told myself teenagers pull away. I didn't tell myself the truth because the truth, that someone had poisoned my nephew against me using his dead father as the weapon, was something I wasn't ready to hold. If any of this is landing for you, the silence, the Sunday calls that go unanswered, the weight of being competent in rooms that refuse to see it, hit subscribe. You're going to want to be here for what comes next. Move 3. Cecily submitted a formal complaint to the hospital credentialing board alleging that I had falsified my residency records. She claimed my military surgical training didn't meet civilian equivalency standards and that my credentials had been rubber-stamped rather than verified. A credentialing complaint isn't a conversation. It's a process. It triggers a formal review. My surgical privileges were flagged pending investigation. For 11 days, I couldn't operate. 11 days where my patients were rerouted to other surgeons, where my residents were reassigned, where I walked past the OR board and my name wasn't on it. 11 days where I sat in my office and touched the hinge of my jaw and listened to it click and thought about David's scissors in my bag and wondered if this was what finishing what he started was supposed to feel like. Robert called once during those 11 days. He was careful. Cecily mentioned something about a credentialing issue. Is everything okay? I told him it was being handled. He didn't ask by whom. He didn't ask what Cecily had done. I think he knew. I think knowing and asking are different things for Robert, and he'd chosen his side a long time ago without ever admitting he'd made a choice. The complaint was baseless. My records were immaculate. Army surgical training doesn't get rubber stamped. It gets forged in places where the nearest hospital is a helicopter ride you might not survive. But the process had to run. 11 days. My name off the board. My residence reassigned. Cecily never mentioned it again. She didn't have to. The damage was the point. And then her daughter Hannah's wedding invitation arrived. Thick cream cardstock, gold embossing. A ceremony at the Whitfield Country Club, followed by a reception for 200 guests. I was invited. Specifically, I was seated at the head table. I almost didn't go. I sat in my apartment the night the invitation arrived, still in scrubs from a 14-hour shift, eating cold leftover pad thai from the container with a plastic fork. The envelope sat on the counter. The cream cardstock looked expensive against the chipped laminate. I thought about every comment, every lie, every Sunday call Leo didn't return. I went because Leo would be there, and because David would have gone, and because sometimes the table that doesn't want you is exactly the table you sit at. The rehearsal dinner was at the country club's private dining room. 18 people at a long table, white linen, candles in low glass holders. The air smelled like garlic butter and lilies, the kind of arrangement that costs more than most people's grocery bill. I wore a simple black dress. No jewelry except small earrings. I carried a clutch, small dark leather. Inside it, David's field surgical scissors. I don't know why I brought them. I do know why I brought them. Cecily greeted me at the door. "Blair, you made it." She half turned to the next arrival before I could respond. I found my seat. The place card had my name in calligraphy. I was between Robert and a groomsman I didn't know. Cecily was across from me. The candles between us guttered in the air conditioning. The toasts started after the salad course. Cecily stood. She was good at this. The public version of warmth, the practiced smile, the way she held the champagne flute like it was part of her hand. She talked about Hannah, about the wedding preparations, about family. Then she looked at me. "We're so glad Blair could join us. Most of you know Blair is, well, she's a nurse. She works in emergency medicine." She paused, smiled. She couldn't quite get into a real specialty, but she tries very hard. A few people laughed, polite, uncertain laughter. The groomsman next to me shifted in his chair. Cecily wasn't done. She barely scraped through a second-tier residency, but we love her anyway. I set my fork down. I pressed 2 fingers to the hinge point below my left ear. The joint clicked, quiet enough that only I could hear it. Robert stared at his bread plate. He didn't look up. I didn't correct her. I didn't stand. I didn't excuse myself. I reached under the table, opened my clutch just enough to feel the edge of David's scissors against my fingertips. And I closed the clutch again. The dinner continued. I didn't eat. The groomsman next to me asked what kind of nursing I did. I told him I worked in surgical services. He nodded politely and turned back to his steak. That night, in the hotel bathroom, I locked the door. I sat on the edge of the tub. I opened my clutch and took out David's scissors. I held them against my jaw, right where it clicks, right where the steel retractor sat for 40 minutes in a sandstorm in Wardak. And I closed my eyes. The note was still tied to the handle. Finish what I started. I pressed the flat of the blade against the joint and let the cold metal ache. I wasn't going to defend myself. That wasn't the point, and it never had been. But I also wasn't going to leave, because tomorrow there would be a wedding with 200 guests, and Cecily would be in her element, the mother of the bride, the center of the room, the woman who controlled the narrative. And I would be the nurse who couldn't get into a real specialty, sitting quietly at the table she'd assigned me. What Cecily didn't know, what nobody at that rehearsal dinner knew, was that in 11 hours, a 5-year-old flower girl was going to eat a canapé with tree nuts in it. And her throat was going to close, and her lips were going to turn blue, and she was going to hit the parquet floor between the dance floor and the cake table, and every single person in that room, every doctor, every guest, every member of that family was going to freeze. Every single person except me. The wedding was everything Cecily had planned it to be. I'll give her that. The Whitfield Country Club ballroom had been transformed into something out of a magazine. White peonies in tall glass vases, gold Chiavari chairs, a string quartet playing Pachelbel as the guests filed in. The ceremony was outdoors on the terrace overlooking the ninth hole, and the late afternoon sun hit the fountain just right, scattering light across Hannah's dress like someone had planned it. Hannah looked stunning. Genuinely. She was Cecily's daughter from her first marriage, not David's, but I'd known her since she was 11. I'd helped her with biology homework over FaceTime during my fellowship. She'd asked me once, shy and serious, if the human body could really keep going after it lost that much blood. I told her yes. She said she wanted to be a veterinarian. I told her the anatomy wasn't that different. She didn't ask me to do a reading at the ceremony. I hadn't expected one. But I noticed Leo was an usher. He walked past my row without looking at me. 19 years old now, tall. David's jawline, David's hands. He held the program like he didn't know what to do with it. I watched him and touched the hinge of my jaw. Click. The reception moved indoors. 200 guests, round tables with gold chargers and calligraphy name cards. The dance floor was parquet, polished to a shine that reflected the chandeliers. The cake table anchored the far wall, 5 tiers, white fondant, sugar peonies cascading down one side. Between the dance floor and the cake table was a narrow corridor of open space, maybe 12 feet wide. That corridor matters. Remember it. I was seated at table 3. Not the head table this time. Cecily had moved me. My place card was between a college friend of the groom's and an elderly aunt who smelled like lavender and didn't say much. I could see the head table from where I sat. Cecily, Robert, Leo, Hannah, the groom. Cecily in cream silk, holding court. What happens next is the reason I'm telling you this story. The cocktail hour bled into dinner, toasts. The best man told a long story about a fishing trip. Hannah's maid of honor cried. The string quartet shifted to jazz standards. People moved to the dance floor. The waitstaff began circulating with trays of canapés, small bites on white napkins. Figs with goat cheese. Smoked salmon on rye points. And a third option, a bite-sized tartlet with a walnut praline crust. Tree nuts, walnuts specifically. I didn't know the flower girl's name then. I learned it later. She was 5. Her name was Lily. She belonged to one of the groom's cousins, and she'd done her job beautifully. Scattered rose petals down the aisle with the kind of focus only a 5-year-old can bring to a task that serious. Lily took a tartlet from a passing tray. I was watching the dance floor. Watching Leo dance with Hannah. He was awkward, a little stiff, and I saw David in every movement. The way he held his shoulders, the way he ducked his head when he laughed. I was pressing 2 fingers below my ear without realizing it. The aunt next to me glanced over but said nothing. Then I heard it. A cough, short, tight, the kind of cough that doesn't clear. I turned. Lily was standing in that 12-foot corridor between the dance floor and the cake table. She had one hand on her throat, the other still held half the tartlet. Her face was flushed, not embarrassment, not exertion. Flushed the way skin gets when histamine floods the system and capillaries dilate all at once. She coughed again, wheezed. Her mother, 3 feet away, hadn't noticed yet. She was talking to another guest, champagne in hand, laughing at something. I stood up. My chair scraped the floor. The aunt looked at me. Lily's lips were changing color. Not blue yet, dusky, the particular purple-gray that tells you the airway is narrowing and the clock just started. I'd seen it in trauma bays. I'd seen it in field hospitals. I'd seen it on a soldier in Wardak whose trachea was swelling shut from an allergic reaction to a field-expedient antibiotic, and I'd had a surgical airway kit in 30 seconds. I didn't have a surgical airway kit. I had a clutch with scissors in it and a room full of people who hadn't noticed yet. I moved, not ran, moved. Straight line. Table 3 to the corridor. 8 seconds. Lily hit the floor. Her knees buckled first, then she sat down hard on the parquet, and then she was on her back. The tartlet rolled out of her hand. Her lips were blue now, properly blue, cyanotic. Her chest was heaving, but the air wasn't getting through. The wheeze had become a high-pitched stridor, the sound of air forcing itself through a space the size of a coffee straw. Her mother turned, screamed, dropped the champagne glass. It shattered on the parquet, and nobody cared. 200 people in that ballroom. I registered the silence spreading outward from the point of impact like a shockwave. The string quartet stopped mid-phrase. Conversations died. Heads turned. And in that specific crystallized moment of collective paralysis, 200 adults, several of them physicians, including one board-certified dermatologist at the head table, nobody moved. Nobody except me. I was on my knees beside Lily in 4 seconds. The parquet was hard under my kneecaps, cold through the fabric of my dress. I could feel the vibration of the bass speaker still thumping from the playlist someone hadn't paused yet. "She's in anaphylaxis," I said. Not loud, not shouting. Loud enough for the mother. "Does she have an EpiPen?" The mother was frozen, hands over her mouth, shaking her head. "She doesn't have one. I didn't bring it." "Does anyone have an EpiPen?" A man at table 7 stood up, reached into his jacket, held up an auto-injector. "My son's allergic to bees. I always carry one. Bring it to me, now." He did. His hands were shaking. Mine weren't. I uncapped the EpiPen, placed my left hand on Lily's thigh, mid-outer, right over the vastus lateralis, because that's where the muscle is thickest and the absorption is fastest. I drove the injector through the fabric of her flower girl dress and held it for 10 seconds. I counted in my head. The same count I'd used on the soldier in Wardak. The same count I'd used on a 9-year-old who'd been stung by a wasp on the playground outside the base hospital in Fort Campbell. 10 seconds. I pulled the needle. Set the spent injector on the floor beside me. The epinephrine wouldn't open the airway completely. Not yet. The swelling was too advanced. Grace's stridor was still audible. Her oxygen saturation was dropping. I couldn't measure it, but I could see it in the color of her nail beds, the grayish tinge around her nostrils. I tilted her head back. Placed one hand on her forehead, the other under the angle of her jaw. Jaw thrust maneuver. Gentle. Precise. Not the way you learn it on a mannequin in a classroom. The way you learn it on a soldier whose face is covered in blood and sand, and the only thing keeping him alive is the airway you're holding open with your bare hands while someone calls for the medevac that's 12 minutes out. I held Lily's airway open and I talked. "Lily, my name is Blair. I'm a doctor. You're having an allergic reaction and I gave you medicine for it. The medicine is working. Your throat is going to open up. I need you to breathe slowly. Can you do that for me? Slow breath in." Her eyes were wide, terrified. 5 years old and staring up at a stranger on the floor of a wedding reception. But she tried. A thin, ragged breath in, then another. The stridor decreased, slightly. The epinephrine was working. The bronchospasm was easing. I maintained the jaw thrust. My hands were steady. The joint below my left ear clicked once, the TMJ shifting under pressure. And I ignored it the way I'd ignored it 1,000 times on 1,000 patients. Lily's mother was on the floor beside me now, sobbing. I spoke to her without looking away from Grace's face. "Call 911 if someone hasn't already." Tell them anaphylaxis in a 5-year-old, 1 dose of epinephrine administered intramuscularly, and we may need a second dose. Tell them I'm maintaining the airway manually and she's responding. Can you do that? She nodded. Someone handed her a phone. I stayed on my knees, both hands on Grace. The parquet was digging into my shins. The shattered champagne glass was 6 inches from my left knee. I could smell the wine mixing with floor polish. Somewhere behind me, the bass speaker finally went silent. Someone had paused the playlist. 200 people watched. I didn't look up, not once, not at the head table, not at Cecily, not at Robert or Leo. I looked at Grace. I monitored her breathing. I counted respirations. I watched the color return to her lips, blue fading to dusky, dusky fading to pink. 7 minutes. That's how long it took for the paramedics to arrive. 7 minutes of me on that parquet floor in a black dress with my hands on a 5-year-old's jaw, talking her through every breath. 12 feet from the cake table, under the chandeliers, in front of every person Cecily had ever told I was a nurse who couldn't get into a real specialty. The paramedics came through the service entrance. 2 of them. I gave the handoff the way I give handoffs in my trauma bay. Clean, specific, no wasted words. 5-year-old female, anaphylaxis secondary to tree nut ingestion. 1 dose 0.15 milligram epinephrine autoinjector administered IM to the right, vastus lateralis, approximately 8 minutes ago. Airway was partially obstructed on my arrival. Jaw thrust maneuver initiated and maintained. Stridor has resolved. Respirations now 16 per minute and unlabored. No second dose administered. No loss of consciousness. She's been verbal for the last 4 minutes. The lead paramedic looked at me. He was mid-40s, weathered, the kind of face that's seen a lot of floors. He had a unit patch on his sleeve I recognized. 101st Airborne, same division my brother served with. You military? He asked. Not suspicious, recognizing something. 10 years, Army, forward surgical team. He nodded once, the kind of nod that doesn't need words. Then he looked down at Grace, back at me. Textbook management, she's stable because of you. They loaded Lily onto the stretcher. Her mother went with them. Lily was breathing on her own, color normal, crying softly, the good kind of crying, the kind that means the airway is open enough to produce sound. I stood up. My knees ached. My dress had a crease pressed into it from the parquet. A thin line of champagne had soaked into the hem from the shattered glass. The ballroom was silent. 200 faces. I could feel them. I didn't scan the room. I brushed off my knees, straightened my dress, pressed 2 fingers to the hinge of my jaw. Click. Then I heard Cecily's voice. Small, from the head table, not the rehearsal dinner voice, not the toast voice. Something stripped down. That was, Blair, I didn't know you could. I looked at her, just looked. I didn't speak. A voice came from behind me, the lead paramedic. He hadn't left yet. He was standing by the service entrance, his partner already wheeling Grace toward the ambulance, and he was looking at Cecily with the particular expression of someone who has just heard something that doesn't match what he watched. Ma'am, he said, I don't know what you think she does for a living, but that woman just performed a textbook anaphylaxis intervention with manual airway management on a parquet floor in a dress. I've been a paramedic for 22 years. I was a combat medic before that, 18 months in Wardak Province. The room went still. Not quiet. Still. The air conditioning hummed. A candle on the nearest table flickered. He looked at me, then back at Cecily. That's not a nurse who couldn't get into a specialty. That's a trauma surgeon who's done this on a dirt floor with less than what she had tonight. I know because I've seen the teams that work in those tents. He paused. She just saved that little girl's life with an EpiPen in her bare hands. You should know who's sitting at your table. The silence after that was absolute. The kind of silence that has weight. I could feel it pressing against my chest. Cecily's mouth opened, closed. Her champagne flute was still in her hand. She set it down. The bass clinked against the charger plate. I didn't. She never said. I looked at her, across the 12 feet of parquet where Lily had been lying 30 seconds earlier. You didn't ask. You never once asked. Cecily stared at me. Robert stared at his hands. Leo was standing near the head table, frozen, his usher's boutonniere slightly crooked. He was looking at me the way David used to look at a problem he'd underestimated. I took one breath, held it, let it go. I am a board-certified trauma surgeon. I completed a Level 1 trauma fellowship. I spent 10 years in the United States Army, including 18 months on a forward surgical team in the same province where your husband's best friend died. My voice didn't rise. I held a retractor in my teeth for 40 minutes to save a soldier's life, and it broke my jaw. That clicking sound you've heard at every family dinner and never asked about, that's what service left me. 16 words too many, probably, but they were mine, every one of them. Cecily's hand moved to the table edge. Her fingers gripped it. The cream silk of her sleeve trembled. Blair, don't, I said. At the head table, Robert lifted his eyes from his hands for the first time. His face had the look of a man watching a structure he'd helped build start to collapse, and understanding at last that he'd been standing on the wrong side of the wall. And Leo, 19 years old, David's jawline, David's hands, took one step away from the head table. Toward me. He didn't reach me. Not then. He took that one step and stopped, like his body had moved before his mind caught up. His lips parted. Nothing came out. He looked at Cecily, then back at me, then at the floor where Lily had been lying. I didn't close the distance. That wasn't mine to do. I picked up my clutch from where I'd set it on the edge of table 3. I walked to the service corridor. I passed the paramedic. He was writing on a clipboard. He looked up. I nodded. He nodded back. The kind of exchange that happens between people who've worked the same ground and don't need to explain it. I found the women's restroom off the lobby, locked the door, sat on the cold tile with my back against the wall. I opened the clutch. David's scissors. Still sharp. Still stained. The note still tied to the handle in his medic scrawl. Finish what I started. I pressed the flat of the blade against my jaw. Right on the hinge. Right where the TMJ clicks. The steel was cold from the air conditioning, and I held it there until it warmed against my skin and I could feel my own pulse through the metal. I closed my eyes. I stayed like that for a long time, long enough for the tile to make my legs ache, long enough for the muffled sounds of the reception resuming to filter through the door. Tentative music, low voices, the particular hum of 200 people recalibrating what they thought they knew. I didn't cry. I don't say that to sound hard. I say it because the tears I had for David, for the years of silence, for the Sunday calls, Leo stopped returning. Those had been spent long ago, in other bathrooms, in other cities, on other nights. What I felt, sitting on that tile floor, wasn't grief. It was the specific exhaustion of being right and having it cost you everything anyway. I flew home the next morning. Early flight. I didn't attend the brunch. The consequences came in pieces, not all at once, not delivered neatly. They arrived the way real consequences do, through secondhand reports, forwarded emails, and the slow grinding of systems that don't care about your feelings. The credentialing complaint was first. My department chair, Dr. Diane Holloway, called me on a Tuesday, 9 days after the wedding. Her voice had the particular flatness of someone delivering facts she finds personally offensive but professionally satisfying. The board reviewed Cecily Sinclair's complaint in full, she said. The hospital submitted your complete verified record, Army surgical training documentation, fellowship evaluations, board certification, case logs, 1,700 supervised trauma cases. She paused. The complaint was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it's flagged in the system as frivolous. If she files again, it triggers an automatic counter-review for harassment of a credentialed physician. Another pause. Blair, the board chair, used the word exemplary. He doesn't use that word. I thanked her. She told me my name was back on the OR board. Had been for a week, actually. I'd already noticed. My residents had too. One of them, a second year named Dr. Nora Hale, had left a coffee on my desk the morning it reappeared. No note, just coffee, still warm. The estate matter came next. Robert's brother, a quiet accountant named Daniel who handled the family's financial logistics, emailed me 3 weeks after the wedding. He wasn't someone I'd spoken to in years. His email was 4 sentences. The estate attorney rejected Cecily's petition to modify the death gratuity distribution. The original terms stand. Your share remains as David's will specified. I thought you should know. That was it. No commentary, no apology for the fact that it had been attempted at all. Just the mechanical confirmation that my brother's last financial act on my behalf hadn't been undone by the woman who married his best friend. I sat with that email for 20 minutes. Then I closed it and went to the OR. The social erosion I learned about from Robert's mother, Margaret. She called me 6 weeks after the wedding. Margaret was 81, sharp as a scalpel, and had never liked Cecily, but had kept that opinion in a locked drawer for the sake of family cohesion. The wedding had picked the lock. The Hendersons asked Cecily to step down from the hospital auxiliary board, Margaret told me. Her voice carried the specific neutrality of a woman who was enjoying something she felt she shouldn't enjoy. Apparently, several members were at the reception. They saw what happened. They also heard what she said at the rehearsal dinner. Word travels in this town, Blair. You know that. I did. Dr. Whitmore, you remember him, the cardiologist on Oak Street. He was at table 9. He told his wife. His wife told the Women's Guild. The Women's Guild told everyone. Patricia took a breath. Cecily's practice hasn't lost patients yet, but the referral network is cooling. Dr. Carver stopped sending her cases last month. He told Robert it was a scheduling issue. It wasn't a scheduling issue. Margaret was quiet for a moment. She made a fool of herself, Blair. But more than that, she made a fool of herself in front of people who now know exactly what she dismissed. That's not something this community forgets. I listened. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly. I felt the particular stillness that comes when a system corrects itself and you realize you didn't have to push. You just had to stand where you were and let the truth do what truth does when it gets enough air. Robert's barely speaking to her, Margaret added. Not loudly, not fighting, he just stopped. He eats dinner in the den now, watches the news. She talks. He doesn't answer. I think he's been not answering for years, Blair. I think the wedding just made it visible. I thanked her. She told me to take care of my jaw. She'd always noticed the click. She'd never asked about it either, but she said it like an apology. Leo called on a Thursday evening, 8 weeks after the wedding. I was in my apartment, still in scrubs, standing at the kitchen counter eating cold pad thai from the container. The parallel wasn't lost on me. Same counter, same meal, different call. His voice was lower than I remembered. 19, almost 20. David's voice at that age, the same hesitant register when he wasn't sure of his footing. Aunt Blair. Leo. Silence. 6 seconds. I counted them the way I count respirations. She told me you chose your career over Dad's memory. She said you left because you didn't care enough to stay. I didn't respond. I let him keep going. I believed her. I was 14, and I believed her, and I stopped answering your calls, and I... His voice cracked. Just slightly. A hairline fracture in the composure he was trying to hold. I watched you on that floor, with Lily, and I thought, that's not someone who doesn't care. That's not someone who runs from anything. I pressed my fingers to my jaw. Click. Your dad asked me to finish what he started, I said. That's why I went. I know, Mom, Robert's mom, she showed me the note, the one on the scissors. I didn't ask how Patricia had gotten a photo of it. It didn't matter. I'm sorry I stopped calling, Leo said. I'm sorry I believed her. You were 14. She was the adult in the room. That's not on you. More silence. Then, can I come visit you? Not for a holiday, not for anything. I want to know the stuff about Dad that she never told me. The real stuff. I looked at the cold pad tie, at the counter, at the scrubs I was still wearing at 9 p.m. because the shift had run long and I hadn't bothered to change. Anytime, I said, the door's open. I meant it. I also meant the boundary inside it, not a holiday, not a performance, not a family event where someone else controls the seating chart, just a door and two people and the truth about a man we both loved. Leo visited 3 weeks later. He sat on my couch and I told him about David. The real David. The one who was afraid of spiders and sang off-key in the shower and wrote that note on a pair of scissors because he knew I'd need a reason to keep going when the going got unbearable. Leo cried. I didn't. But I sat close enough that our shoulders touched, and that was its own kind of language. Robert sent a card. It arrived without Cecily's name on the return address. 4 words inside. I'm proud of you. I kept the card. I put it in the same drawer where I keep my operational commendations. A Bronze Star, an Army Commendation Medal, a letter from the specialist whose spleen I saved in Wardak. He'd tracked me down through the VA and written 3 pages about a night he barely remembered and I'll never forget. Robert's card fit there. It fit because it was late and honest and insufficient and real, which is exactly what the best commendations are. I didn't write back, not yet. Not yet is different from never. I know the difference. I think Robert does too. 6 months later, I was in the OR trauma case. Motorcycle versus guardrail, 23-year-old male, splenic laceration. The kind of bleed that gives you a 4-minute window before the math turns against you. My second-year resident, Nora Hale, was assisting. The room was quiet except for the monitors and the suction, and my voice calling for instruments. I felt the click in my jaw. Pressed nothing. Both hands inside the patient. Sarah glanced at me. She'd heard it. She stopped talking and focused. She'd learned what the click meant. I saved him. 46 minutes. No retractor in my teeth this time. Full team. Full power. Clean instruments. The lights stayed on. After, in the scrub room, Nora was washing out beside me. She was quiet for a while. Then, Dr. Sinclair, can I ask you something? Go ahead. The jaw thing, the click, where'd that come from? I turned off the water, dried my hands, looked at her reflection in the stainless steel above the sink. Wardak Province, I said. Sandstorm, 40 minutes with a retractor in my teeth. She stared. And you just kept operating? The patient needed both my hands. She was quiet. Then she nodded. The nod didn't need words. I drove home that night with the windows down. Late spring. The air smelled like cut grass and warm asphalt and something blooming I couldn't name. My jaw clicked when I yawned at a red light. I touched the hinge point below my ear, not concentrating this time, just checking. Still there, still mine. David's scissors were in my bag on the passenger seat. They're always in my bag, not because I need them, because some compasses don't point north. They point toward the thing you promised. And the promise isn't finished when the surgery's done, or the patient walks out, or the family finally hears the truth. The promise is finished when you keep showing up. Every shift, every patient, every time someone hits the floor and no one else moves, you move. That's what David meant. That's what he started. And I'll finish it the only way I know how. With steady hands and a jaw that clicks and a pair of scissors that remind me every single day that the people who see you clearly aren't always the ones sitting across from you at dinner. Sometimes they're the ones who wrote you a note and tied it to a handle and trusted you to carry it forward. I'm still carrying it. If you've ever been the person in the room who knew exactly what to do, and the people who should have known you best were the last ones to see it, I'd like to hear your story. Tell me in the comments. Tell me who finally saw you, or tell me you're still waiting. Either way, I hear you. And if this stayed with you, hit subscribe. Tap the bell. I've got more stories like this one, and I think you're the kind of person who understands why they need to be told.